Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And we're back to the three-part series that I'm doing. This is part 2 of my tasting of some long-aged whiskeys. They're from GlenDronach. They're part of the CASK Bottling series, which this is batch 19, 12 different casks that were selected by Dr. Rachel Barrie to talk about and show kind of the history of GlenDronach and its flavor profiles. And so I'm going to be jumping in and tasting my second whiskey. This is the oldest of the series. This is actually a 29-year-old whiskey. It's aged in an Oloroso sherry butt, so think GlenDronach 18. But this has been aged for an additional 11 years. And what's fascinating about this whiskey is that, and all of these actually, is that this is previous to the mothballing of the distillery that happened around the turn of the 20th to 21st century. And so we're getting a chance to taste stuff that is pre-Billy Walker and really pre-Brown Foreman coming in and all of that. So this is fun because this is from a time period where whiskey was not really overly popular at the time. It was just about to turn the corner. And so 1992, what were you doing in 1992? I mean, my daughter wasn't even born in 1992, and she's out of college and off doing her thing. So that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And this is one of the things I want to talk about as I start to do this nosing and tasting, is that I feel like I sometimes bash older whiskeys and say, they're just going to taste like the cask, and it, is it really going to be that great? It's going to start becoming too influenced by one end of the spectrum rather than the other, or it's getting smooth, which means that it's either becoming so subtle that you have to spend an hour and a half trying to find the particular flavors in it. And is that really worth it, especially when you're paying as much as you're paying for a whiskey? But there's another part of me too that has this reverence for what this whiskey and what the distiller and the warehouse manager and everybody else has gone through to bring this whiskey to me. If you think about it, we're talking about 29 years of that cask sitting there while all these other casks are moving in and out. This one being taken care of, maybe with an impression right off the bat that this is something they want to hang on to and maybe save to see what happens when these whiskeys get older. And so we're talking about, when we start talking about complexity and how sometimes the longer it's in the barrel, it starts to lose that complexity and it becomes very subtle. This is something I know now, and it's something that now has held me back from buying or being interested in tasting older whiskeys. Kind of a, am I really the person worthy to be drinking this? Because I know there are people with greater palates than I. People who will truly, fully appreciate the whiskey. And so is it fair for me coming in going, I'm just experimenting, I just want to see what it is? Is that really what I should be doing? And sometimes my respect for the whiskey says, no, I am not quite ready for this yet. And it's funny because I've had that same attitude in the past, but the attitude was driven by a different motive in the past, which was that I just felt like I wouldn't be able to taste anything in there. So what the heck would be the use of me getting an older age whiskey? That's just a waste of money. Why would I do that? And that's a consideration I think you have to make when you're going to get one of these whiskeys is, do you feel like your palate is ready for it? Because what I found yesterday when I first went through these whiskeys trying to do tasting notes is that they were way too subtle for me to pick anything out. I'm looking at 10 to 12 flavors on a tasting note sheet, and I'm going, I am not picking up more than maybe one or two. Is that worthwhile? But what I found after drinking the first whiskey today is that once I got relaxed and I sat back and just enjoyed that, wow, it came out. It opened up for me, and it gave me flavors that I didn't expect. So now I'm going, maybe it is time that I'm jumping in and tasting these whiskeys, and maybe I can have some, keep that reverence for the whiskey and not play it down because it's expensive or because people buy long age whiskeys to brag or whatever, any of that sort of stuff. Now I can just enjoy it for what it is. This is the oldest of the collection. I'm drinking them in the order that I did my blind tastings yesterday. So this is out of cask 217. It is 55.4% alcohol by volume, so it is cask strength and from a single cask. It comes from an Oloroso sherry cask. It cost $820 a bottle, so thank you, GlenDronach, for letting me do this tasting, because I understand that this is some valuable whiskey, and this is the 1992 version. Now, some people will say $820, come on, they're just ripping you off. Well, in this particular case, it comes out of a sherry cask. I don't know how many bottles they can get out of a sherry cask, somewhere in the upper 600, I believe, range. And they got 383 bottles out of this cask. So that says they've lost a bit of liquid in there. Have they lost enough liquid to justify the price? I don't know, but they also have had to keep that cask in warehouse space that they pay taxes on. So, there's a whole lot of factors that go in. And this is one of the places where I want to suggest that you are careful about judging the price of a whiskey, because some of the price, usually the price that the distillery is charging for it, unless you're Macallan, is a price that really isn't gouging. It's kind of pricing it for what they've had to put into it. Maybe a little upcharge there because of the age, but not really gouging. Where the gouging usually happens is once it hits your local liquor store, and anybody who has looked for a bottle of, say, 15-year-old Pappy Van Winkle, I think the price I saw on their website for MSRP was 117 or something like that, somewhere in the 100s. But for you to find it, it's going to cost you a good, 800, 1,000, 2,000. And I've seen stores blatantly gouging. Even on some whiskeys, Eagle Rare is a good example. Here in the States, bourbon really gets hit, especially the ones that get put on allocation. And so you'll see prices double, triple, quadruple, but usually the ones I'm starting to see now are like 10x, 15x, 20x. My local bar, actually, sad to say, if you are a bourbon fan, their prices are pretty high on pours of bourbon. But then I look down their Scotch list and I'm like, actually, these are some pretty good prices. But that's because bourbon in this area is in demand and they can get the money out of it. And there's this mentality these days of, sell it for whatever the market will bear. When I first got into doing web design, I was charging $30 an hour. I soon realized that I couldn't live charging $30 an hour, and this was, 20 years ago. And so I pushed it to $90 an hour. Then I could actually start a business off of it, and then I could survive. But then I was working with a company that I did some work for, and their philosophy was ask the client how much money they have budgeted and then make your price fit that. And I could never do that. I never could do that. I hated that. I said, I am going to price this for what I think fair value is for my time and what I need to take. So some will say I've really lost out on a chance for riches. But in another way, I've had great client relationships for years and years. And I think this is a cautionary tale for liquor stores that are gouging right now, because there will be a day when whiskey isn't as popular as it is right now. And when that day hits, people will remember. And you're probably likely to see a lot of those liquor stores going out of business. And I say, hey, you know what? Your fault. You know, you decided to gouge people. But when I look at the distilleries, I tend to see that not happen as much. The reason I bring up Macallan is because you constantly see they're raising the bar into the millions on a bottle of whiskey. And I'm not sure 100% whether that's coming from the distillery or if that's coming through distributors or what, but it's ridiculous. And honestly, I don't know what a 75-year-old Macallan's going to taste like, but it's not worth me spending millions of dollars to sip a liquid. That's just me. That's just me. So anyway, back to this cask 217. Okay, so this is 1992. This is the one that when I did the blind tasting and nosing yesterday, it was like, okay, the nose is a little bit more one-dimensional. I'm getting a nutty character out of it. I'm getting like maybe some raisin out of it. But leather and kind of the alcohol bite on the nose were the main things that I kind of pulled out of this. That old warehouse nuttiness, but very subtle nose to me. And so I'm like, okay, let me read the notes on that Dr. Rachel Barrie came up with, and she came up with a whole lot more than I did. So anyway, cheers. Thick mouthfeel. Lays nice and heavy. That leather kind of continues through. Again, a little berry comes into that, and some cocoa. Again, that chocolate, but more subtle here. Has a nice finish to it. There was a little bit of heat that came through, kind of a gingery kind of heat. And then as we're headed into the finish here, I get almost like a cola. There's a cherry. There's a little bit of that oak character coming through, a little tannin bitter that hits. And but I think the thing that really kind of stood out to me on that was kind of that cola note, which I usually equate with cherry and oak. Again, these are not as subtle as they were yesterday when I first tasted them. So I think they opened up after I got some air into the bottles. So let that be a note to you. And this is what we call the neck pour. Sometimes the neck pour isn't that great because you've just opened the bottle and it hasn't had time to get some oxygen in the bottle to help it start to oxidize and break down ever so slightly. But yeah, the leather's still there. That nutty oak kind of a smell coming through. And you expect with Oloroso sherry that you're going to end up getting some of these, plum and raisin and fig notes, but they're not overly strong here, if at all. It's more on the nose than anywhere else. So $820 a bottle. I mean, that's up to you. If these flavor notes fit and you don't mind, hunting for these flavors and the subtlety of it. For me, it's a good whiskey, but it's not something that I'm overly excited about. Of the three that I've tasted, I can tell you doing my blind tastings, this was the one that I was like, yeah, it's okay, but I'm not leaping out of my seat for it. So but they may be flavors that really hit your palate rather than hitting mine. So maybe you like that old leather feel, and so it's gonna fit you more. Well, one more video to do, be coming up in a few days, and until next time, cheers and Slainte. Yeah, nice cocoa and cola. Interesting.